Greetings and welcome, I'm Ash, and I've spent well over 100 hours playing The Witcher 3, and I would even go as far as to say that I consider it to be one of the finest RPGs ever made. However, while I've certainly done my fair share of exploration and monster slaying, I am willing to wager that a good portion of that time was spent in taverns rather than out in the wilderness. You see, in my world, Geralt didn't really do as much monster hunting as he did card hunting. Because let's face it, demolishing yet another damnable nest of neckers isn't going to help me finish this Gwent deck. But no matter how creative and addictive The Witcher 3's Gwent minigame was, it still suffered from a limited amount of viable cards and balance holes so large you could drag a Wyvern through them. Most of the decks are based around the same few overpowered cards, while the rest of the collection simply rotted away in Geralt's backpack alongside a variety of monster heads and body parts. Even back then, it was obvious that what Gwent really needed in order to become truly great was a standalone release. An entire game solely dedicated to the concept and filled to the brim with brand new cards, mechanics, and a whole host of balance changes. And as luck would have it, that little wish came true about a week ago as Gwent, the Witcher card game, entered closed beta. So now that we have a standalone version of Gwent, I'm sure the big question on everyone's mind is whether it's any good or not. Well, let's go and find out. Before I say anything else, do bear in mind that Gwent is currently in an early closed beta state. As such, there are multiple features missing, the balance isn't yet nailed down, and there is a distinct lack of small, quality of life features that make the game easier for new players. Naturally, all of this is still being worked on, but if you manage to get a beta key yourself, don't be surprised when you log in and notice that the single player content is completely missing. That will be arriving at a later date, given that this closed beta is mostly about the multiplayer experience. With that brief disclaimer now out of the way, allow me to first explain what exactly Gwent even is. To put it simply, it is a card game that focuses heavily on resource management, card advantage, and careful planning in order to assure your own tricks don't end up working against you. Unlike most other card games, in Gwent you're only allowed to play one card per turn, so there is always a chance to counter the opponent's strategy before it actually grows to fruition, but also to give them a chance to become overconfident and bait them into a devastating trap. Most interestingly of all, the match winner is decided through a best of 3 system that only allows you to draw 3 extra cards throughout the entire match. As such, it is of vital importance to ration your threats and answers given that they are all you really have to work with, but also recognize when you have been bested so that you can concede a battle in order to win the Great War. These sort of mechanics have already proven themselves to be a great deal of fun in The Witcher 3, and I'm glad to say that the standalone version of Gwent has only managed to make them even better. So, what are the major differences between The Witcher 3's Gwent and the standalone version? In terms of gameplay, they are almost exactly the same, so if you're a fan of The Witcher 3's card game, odds are you're going to love this one as well. It's still welcoming to new players, while also being surprisingly complex. There are still plenty of ways to trick your opponents in order to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat, and there are still plenty of different deck archetypes you can toy around with. But while the gameplay mechanics are mostly the same, the cards themselves have been drastically changed as many have been uplifted from their previously useless state, while others have received a much needed nerf. Some of the irrelevant and incredibly boring siege units have been granted an ability to damage enemy units when entering the battlefield, which means that the siege cards are now actually worth putting in your deck. The overpowered cards that double their strength have been toned down as well in order to reduce the I win because I drew the god hand potential. Even poor fucking infantry, one of the worst cards in the entirety of The Witcher 3 and a bane to all new players, is now a completely viable choice when building a deck. The list doesn't end there, however, as many of the specialist cards have also received a significant rework, most notably the obscenely overpowered dragon and the equally obnoxious spies. Villain Trentemer, and yes, that is actually the dragon's name, now no longer instantly destroys the strongest creatures when he enters the battlefield, but rather 3 turns after. Not only is this much more enjoyable to play against, given that the game didn't just swing 20 points in the opponent's favor, but you also have the ability to use this against them. Since the ability only takes effect 3 turns later, you can strategically buff enemy units in order to make them the dragon's target, thus shifting the focus from your own units. Obviously, the opponent can do the same to you, so every time Mr. Willy comes into play, the entire game takes a rather hilarious turn as you stop trying to make your own side stronger and instead start focusing on making your opponents look like juicier targets. As for the spies, they have either been completely reworked in order to no longer provide a card advantage, or have become so much stronger that giving them to your opponent is actually a significant price to pay. Unlike their previous incarnation, every single one of them now provides a slightly different take on the concept, and as such fits the game in a much more natural and balanced way. And best of all, games no longer take 20 minutes to complete because both players are just drawing through their decks. While this new version of Gwent might be nicely balanced, or at least balanced enough that my newbie eyes cannot tell the difference, there is a sinister evil lurking deep within its core: randomness. If you thought that playing against Yogg-Saron in Hearthstone was obnoxious given his ability to completely flip the game around by purely random chance, then I'm afraid you're in for a bit of a surprise with Gwent. There are a couple of cards, and this sadly includes the passive ability for the entire Monsters faction, that are able to pretty much win you the game by flipping a coin. Which, as you might imagine, is not exactly what I like to see in my strategy-focused card games. So, what exactly is the problem? Well, in the case of the Monsters faction, their passive ability states that one random creature will remain on the board at the end of each round. This sounds innocent enough, especially since the Monsters faction loves to swarm the board with absolute garbage, but this passive ability also works on gold, aka legendary cards. Nothing says skill better than having the Monsters player luck out and start a round with their absolute best creature on the board while you have quite literally nothing. But better yet, if you're the Monsters player, you might just start the round with a creature you wanted to lose due to its powerful on-death effect, but didn't because the dice rolls decided you belong in loser will instead. I don't wish for this ability to be either buffed or nerfed, I just want it to be consistent. And speaking of consistency and Yogg-Saron, the Scoia'tael faction has a card that functions in a similar way. Once you put it on the battlefield, it will take a random spell from your deck and simply play it, no matter if it ends up summoning a firestorm over your own troops or a freezing winter that completely decimates your opponent's army. You could build a deck entirely around this card so that you have spells that only positively affect your own minions, but given how powerful card combos are in Gwent, you simply have to carry a large amount of removal spells as well. Then again, you could choose not to use this card at all, but given how card advantage is everything in games with limited drawing power, it is not easy to simply ignore a 2-in-1. It will occasionally ruin your game on its own, but if you hedge your bets and make it a 70% chance for a positive effect, that is more than worth featuring in your deck. And that is exactly where the problem lies. Personally, I despise mechanics like this. Sure, in the grand scheme of things, they are perfectly balanced as the positive and negative effects will average out over the course of thousands of games, but in that one game where you get completely and utterly trashed, it is impossible to not get angry when the only reason behind your loss was a random dice roll. Gwent is supposed to be a strategy game, and one that puts the player's skills front and center. So to have mechanics and cards like this is a bit of a strange design choice. They don't really add anything to the game as they aren't as zany as some of Hearthstone's random effects, but they come with the same sort of negative experiences, so hopefully CDPR will do something to lessen the randomness and promote a more interesting and skillful playstyle instead. Now, I'm sure some of you are thinking I'm just a big old whiny baby and that I can simply replace the cards I dislike for those that I consider truly skillful. However, this is another problematic area for Gwent. Since losses give you absolutely nothing, and since you don't start with many silver, which is epic, or gold, which is legendary, you're going to be stuck playing the basic decks for a very long time. This wouldn't be too much of a problem if the silver and gold cards offered great power at an equally great cost, but they are unfortunately just better and stronger versions of the bronze cards. Most importantly, the golden cards are completely immune to spell effects, both friendly and enemy, so if you have 4 gold cards and your opponent only has 1, you are going to be at a distinct advantage. I've been playing Gwent for a good chunk of hours now, and I've unpacked multiple kegs, which is card packs, but I'm still playing basically the same deck as when I started. This is because the cards I've gained so far just aren't worth putting into a deck without at least having a couple of them due to deck consistency and synergy. This is especially problematic for the extremely powerful gold and silver cards, of which you can only put a certain number in your deck, as I don't even have enough to fill out all of the slots yet. You would think this wouldn't be too much of a problem, as we are currently early in a closed beta, but I'm already being demolished by people whose card quality simply eclipses my own. Fighting an uphill battle every now and then is an exciting experience, but getting steamrolled because the basic cards are just flat out worse is a different story entirely. To Gwent's credit, however, I do love how they've designed the progression system, even if I think it's rather terribly slow right now. Much like Hearthstone, you're able to disenchant cards you don't need in order to craft different ones, and use the ore, aka gold, you gain by winning to buy more card packs. Simple enough. But best of all, if both you and your opponent decide to end the match by sending each other a good game message, you'll both be awarded with a small bit of currency. It is a nearly meaningless feature, and one that in theory doesn't really do anything. But I still somehow found myself feeling all warm and fuzzy inside whenever the opponent would send me a GG message. I guess the little things really do matter. Even the way you open card packs has been cleverly designed to remove frustration. Instead of simply getting 5 random cards and a swift boot to the buttocks, Gwent gives you 4 random cards and the ability to choose the 5th one yourself. Naturally, you can only choose from a couple of randomly generated cards, but since they can be of any rarity, it is a nice way to fill out those gaping holes in your deck. I honestly cannot praise this system enough because it not only makes building your deck slightly easier, but it also helps you invent new ones by introducing you to potentially exciting new cards you've never seen before. It is honestly such a great little feature, I wish every single card game had it. And the final topic I wanted to briefly go over was the UI and the design in general. While I don't have any major complaints about the interface, there are numerous tiny ones that all combine together to make Gwent a lot clunkier than it should be. The most annoying problem is that some enemy cards just don't show up on the recently played part of the screen. So if you turn your head away for a moment, you might just come back to a completely different board and absolutely no idea what in the world just happened. On a similar note, I also dislike how the "you passed your turn" text covers up all of your cards, essentially making them unreadable. This isn't too big of a deal given that you most likely know exactly what you have, but I'm one of those weirdos that likes to constantly fiddle with his cards, so having this massive black bar over them is rather unfortunate. As for the artwork behind the cards themselves, it is pretty damn good. While Hearthstone and similar card games feature mostly cartoonish artwork with a massive focus on silly jokes, the cards in Gwent represent a completely different side of the spectrum. They are drawn in a realistic and professional manner, very similar to Magic the Gathering cards, which goes a long way towards making them more enjoyable to play with. It also helps that the voice acting is generally top-notch, as it was in The Witcher 3, so all of the cards both look and sound awesome. Most impressively, some of the cards have multiple cosmetic variations, so if you spawn an entire horde of Neckers, no two will be alike. With all of that said, I do believe that Gwent still has plenty of room for improvement when it comes to animations and death effects, given that they are currently extremely basic and repetitive. It shouldn't be the case that archers, catapults, and even demonic elves from a completely different world use the same animation when dealing damage. Most people will argue these tiny little details aren't important, but when it comes to ensuring that each round of Gwent feels exciting, it is exactly them that most people will point towards. So hopefully CDPR will realize how important this is and dedicate a couple of future patches solely to design related polish. The gameplay is already pretty damn solid, so it is important that the graphics match it as well. Gwent might currently be in an early closed beta state, but even now it is a vastly superior version of the Witcher 3's minigame. The balance is tighter, there are more viable cards with which you can craft decks, and the card abilities themselves have been greatly redesigned to offer a much more strategic experience. If your only wish from Gwent the Witcher card game was to get a new and improved version of the Witcher 3's Gwent, you can consider your wish granted. When compared to other card games, however, Gwent still requires a bit of work. There is a definitive need for more cards in order to make each strategy less obvious. The animations and sound effects could use a bit of an overhaul if Gwent is ever to compete with Hearthstone, and overall I would like to see a couple of future patches dedicated solely to quality of life issues and the new player experience. While all of that might sound like a tall order, it is well worth mentioning that Gwent only recently entered closed beta, so CDPR still has plenty of time to make all of the necessary changes in order to create something truly special. And here's to hoping they actually manage to do so, because more competition among card games is something everyone will benefit from. Thank you guys for watching, and if you enjoyed this, or even if you didn't, please do let me know. And if you would like to see more, you can either subscribe here, or you can check out the website link down below. That one tends to be updated far more frequently. With all of that said, I hope you guys have a nice day, and I will see you soon. See ya!